Achtung, welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. After a few of the visits and bad news about lost friends, I began to feel that I hadn't just been lucky, but was a survivor of a major tragedy. That's right, Jim. I'm halfway through Sledgehammer's book.
You're loving it.
By God, what a book! What a book!
Well, I think this Thursday we should get the chat I had with Saul and Henry Sledge out.
Yeah.
Since we're in that mood, It's a brilliant book. I haven't read it for a decade or so, but it's I do remember finding it incredibly
what's really
profoundly moving, and just sort of the brutality of it all. And I think the thing is because it's so close and personal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's miles away. It's miles away from British accounts from the 50s and 60s where, you know, he had a bit of a bust up with Jerry and everything was all right. I mean, even if you compare it to other like English accounts, right, or British accounts, don't seem to get quite. I mean, there's this bit where he says, "I sat down and I just started crying, and the tears poured out of me, and I couldn't, you know." And then my mate said to me, "It's okay, Sledge. We're all going through it. Hold yourself together. It'll all be all right." Right? Like, for instance, if you compare that to Recollections of Rifleman Bowlby, there's never a moment like that in that book, even though I think he's going through the same stuff.
It's intimated in Rifleman Bowlby, though, that he's struggling at various times, but he doesn't have. He doesn't say it
as boldly as that, and that's what I think so amazing about this book is about the old breed. Is because he's just telling it. He's not. And maybe it's a simple cultural difference. Like a British account is that little bit more buttoned up and a tiny bit more reserved and holding a little bit more back and not wanting to upset or whatever. But this is, I mean, the extent to which this is unvarnished is kind of amazing.
Well, and, my theory is that when people are writing memoirs for themselves, they're really good.
Yeah.
And when they're writing for an audience, they're just a bit too knowing and just a bit too kind of sort of.
There's a horrendous incident where.
But also because he absolutely was horrendous. Fighting the Japanese on these islands was horrific because it's so close.
But there's this horrendous bit where they're being infiltrated and they see some people and then someone's out in no man's land and a soldier goes out and shoots them, kills them. Shoots them in the head, and it's one of their own.
It's the wrong person.
It's one of their own, and he knows who's done it. And they say, "We must never speak of this again." And he says his grave, you know, says killed in action, and we all know why, and we all know who did it, and we all know how. And I don't know if you'd find that in a because that's the kind of that's like. And obviously, he makes sure everyone in that is anonymous, and he makes sure it's not known. You know, he tidies it up so that there are no names attached. But it's the most horrendous thing, and to include that, to say this is the kind of thing that went on. These are the things we did. I think is there's something.
Well, the rule is, isn't it? If you're moving around at night, if you're getting out of your foxhole at night, you're.
Well, because just before that, it's the thing where he thinks where
he thinks that and there's that scuffle. Was that scuffle?
Yeah, exactly. He's about to kill someone, and he says, "I thought, Sledge, I thought you knew it was me. I thought you knew it would be me." And it's one of his closest.
But isn't that when one of the guys is asleep?
Yeah. Yes, the guy's asleep when they, you know, I mean, because it's not friendly fire. He goes out and shoots him in the head, crawls out there and shoots this guy in the head, and then they realise it's a Marine. Yeah, the other fellow's asleep in his foxhole, so has fallen asleep on watch. So they're not. It's not being dealt with. You know, it's one of those things that they've just had to let it go. But there's the other instant where one of his mates comes over and goes, "I thought you realised it was me." And he's about to shoot him with his carbine, right there in front of him. And the guy goes, "Sledgehammer, it's me." And he's and hasn't said the password, hasn't done what he's meant to do. And if you leave your foxhole, you can expect to be shot. And I just think the way he's prepared the fact that he's prepared to tell us this and prepared to tell us about that. And you know, we had a fantastic chat last week with Andy Aitchison about with the jocks, and we got talking about the sort of, the software aspect of the people. How do you get the people to do this? How do you get people to do this stuff? People have still got to do this stuff. For all your preponderance and all your allied materiel wealth and dominance, you still have to go in and A, kill the enemy, and B, not be killed by the enemy, and C, not be killed in the alarms and excursions that go with those first two things. And I think a friend of mine's reading Chindit as well. I sent a friend of mine Chindit, because we've got these reprints, these incredible things that Penguin have done. I don't know if you're a patron, you'll know about the Richard Rose James book Chindit, which is a memoir a friend of mine found and we've had reprinted. And there's the Alan Moorhead Eclipse, which is sort of a journalistic.
Well, we should talk about each of these a little bit.
We ought to. We really ought to. It's really pushing me back to going, and I know Phillips, Payson, O'Brien is right. Right. I know he's right, but you've still got to colour in the how do men do this? How are men persuaded to do this? How do men hold themselves together?
This is very much a theme of what I'm doing at the moment. I've literally just started in the last week doing the casino book.
Yeah.
And on my desk at the moment is carnage because I've just got papers and folders and the great big fat Germany in the Second World War Volume 8 open, various Italian stuff. It's exactly that. It's so awful. It's just so awful. Yeah. And I sent you my little prologue that I read the other day, which is, well, thank you. But I wanted to just have this little moment of sort of almost calm.
Yeah.
Before it all kicks off. And everyone knows it's going to kick off and everyone knows it's going to be horrendous because there's lots of mountains.
Yeah.
And all I'm thinking about at the moment is the human experience of war, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking also about the Italian, right now this morning I've been writing about the awful dilemma the Italians find themselves in. And, I obviously there's very, very little sympathy for the senior commanders.
Yeah.
But a huge amount of sympathy for the Italian people.
Yeah.
And, what do you do? Because you can't, your country's absolutely finished. You're completely broken. Materially, physically, mentally, Italy is shot.
Yeah.
You've got to get out of the war.
Yeah.
But the Germans know you're about to get out of the war, so they're flooding troops in. And there's absolutely not a chance in hell that they're going to acquiesce and kind of go, do you know what? Actually, we've had a bit of enough of this as well, so we'll pull up the flag. Tell you what, we'll just calmly retreat back the other side of the Alps. Yeah. That's just not going to happen. What's going to happen when they realise is it's going to be very immediate and it's going to be incredibly violent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the same time, how do you know whether you can trust the Allies?
Yeah.
When you're negotiating with them?
Well, you don't. You don't.
Which you don't.
You don't, because if you look at how the Allies have dealt with, say, Vichy France, you can't trust them, because some of the Allies are trying to cut a deal with Vichy France, some of the Allies aren't. The British don't. Yep. British aren't interested. The Americans are trying, go lukewarm on it. That's actually a really good point, isn't it? If you look at if you're a would-be Italian government, I think one of the remarkable things about Italy, and as it spins out of the Second World War, is that it didn't then break up again. Italy's only 5 minutes old in sort of European nation terms, isn't it? That it didn't then sort of defragment. You know what I mean?
Well, one of the reasons it doesn't defragment is because there are the anti-fascist parties, which are known about, and they're obviously underground, but they're kind of, everyone knows they're there.
Yeah.
And obviously beyond the boundaries of Italy itself, from America or whatever, they're not silent at all. So they know they're there. But when the king appoints Badoglio, who is this guy who's sort of 70, nearly knocking 72, and when the king appoints him on the same day that he sacks Mussolini, he says, by the way, there can't be any political parties at all. You're just head of government now. You just got to make this work and just get military people in and technocrats. Just make it work. Yeah. The technocratic solution to the end of the war, and that's your bag. And he goes, well, what about all the democracies? Too many Republicans. Yeah. And of course, King Vittorio Emanuele has just as much blood on his hands as Mussolini, really,
as anybody
because he
else.
let it happen.
Yeah.
And Badoglio's got blood in his hands because he was the guy who it was his idea to use chemical weapons on the Ethiopians in 1935-36. It wasn't Mussolini's idea.
No.
It wasn't anyone else's idea. He said, "I tell you what, this is how we sort out these natives. We just gas them."
Yeah.
And everyone went, "Okay."
Yeah.
And they did. And this is Badoglio. This was his decision.
Yeah.
And he resigns as chief of staff of the Commando Supremo in December 1940 because of the complete disaster of the Greek campaign.
Yeah.
So now he's head of the government. It's not something to really instill a huge amount of confidence.
I mean, in a way,
it?
that'd be like Pétain being put in charge, wouldn't it? In Paris,
it's the same thing. So it's a dictatorship. But at least the fascist party was a party. Now there's nothing. There's no political parties whatsoever. Anyway, the whole thing is just a total shower, and they're in a total pickle of awful proportions. And you're just thinking about these people, and I've got these little people who are in Rome or in Casino Town itself, and they're seeing bombers coming over, and they're just thinking, what's the future hold?
Now, Jim,
what do we think? This is in their diary. I mean, it's just incredible.
Do you think that one of the reasons, because one of the reasons that this is sort of not, and I'm not going to call it an untold story, the Second World War, the forgotten story of the war in Italy. We're not going to do it.
Hidden under a stone story.
We're not going to the lightly concealed story of. We're not going to do that.
The single raid that changed the course of World War II.
Oh God! I mean, how many single raids changed the course?
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is
the single most important secret agent in the whole of World War II.
Do you think?
Yeah,
that some of this is because, look, I mean, if you're coming at the Second World War as a sort of D-Day Dunkirk person, and I tell you what, on Friday, this is a digression, but it's worth it. On Friday, I went to the Churchill War Rooms, right?
Yeah.
Took some friends over from Canada who'd always wanted to go, and we were shown around. Absolutely amazing. When we went to do the podcast, we went behind the sort of jealousy glass, as I call it.
Yeah.
We did, and all these school kids like sort of peering at us through the glass.
Saw the sugar cube in the top drawer and all that.
And we were shown around by Kate Clements, who runs it's her collection that she runs the site, right? It was absolutely amazing. She was just fantastic. And to have another look and see things that hadn't struck me before. So we went in the cabinet room, and there are two maps in the actual war cabinet room. There's the one global map behind them, and then over the other side of the room, and obviously there would have been other maps where the glass is. There is a British Empire world shipping map, Jim, which would have made you go, you see, it's all about shipping. And then
it's all about shipping.
Then we went in the map room itself. There's it's a global shipping thing with pinned on the notice board what ships are out, what the enemy expected strength is, blah blah blah, all that for the whole world. And then there's a map of the UK. And there were so many pinpricks all the way up and down the coast of the UK. And my friend Bjorn said, well, what's that? And I said, well, that's coal. That's coal being run from Newcastle down to London, round the coast. That's what those million pinpricks is. That's what's being protected there. Because it doesn't, people know about Western approaches. They know about the convoys, but they don't know about basically it's not, it's sort of not, it's internal British coal trade. Rather than, although it's not internal, it's going round the coast, but you know what I mean? So coal to keep the country going, basically. And when you just look at that, you look at the effort that's gone into that, and that's being traced in that room, along with absolutely everything else. It's just absolutely amazing. You come back to this, and the people doing it. How do you motivate the people in there to do that? How do you mobilise them? How do you make sure that it's all functioning properly? And this sort of, we're coming back to for me, you've got to come back to the software, the people. But anyway, the question I was going to ask, Jim, is: do you think the reason Italy? Because we talked when we were in the bunker. Kate said a thing about, well, if you're a Dunkirk, D-Day, Second World War person, like someone who has that view of the Second World War, you forget that's not a world war. That's a northern coast of France war. Right?
Right. Yeah.
Right? Please tell me about this world war. That and not just because participants from all over the world come to the northern coast of France for D-Day.
Yeah, because I've just been doing the Aberdeen to Lowestoft run.
Exactly, but there is a world war on, right?
Yeah,
and the minute you start looking at in those terms, but does this mean? Is this why Italy? Because after all, D-Day to Berlin, that's a straight line. Morally a straight line. It happens within a year. It's a blow at the heart of the enemy that must be destroyed. Blah blah blah. Italy, the sheer moral complications around it of a country that's changed side, but has it. To what extent, as you say, are the actual players involved? What side are they really on? They're probably on Italy's side, if they're on anyone's side, rather than the Allied side or the German side. The population are caught in this. The population who, some of whom were entirely enthusiastic for fascism while the wind was blowing in the right direction, and now are not. That you've got Italy's a new country, so it's a patchwork politically. Communism, of course, is a thing that's getting going. Republicanism, blah blah blah, and that's just much more complicated than Himmler and Goebbels, and so it's a harder story to tell, and so it's not one that's really got into people's imaginations. If you're a D-Day Dunkirk D-Day person, Italy is a sideshow, and one of the advantages of relegating Italy to a sideshow is you've now got not to deal with that thorny question of what exactly is going on there. It's a sideshow. No, it's really flipping complex, right? It's complex. It's complex militarily. It's complex strategically. Why you're there, what you're doing. Are you there to tie them up, the Germans, or are you there to defeat them? What are you really there for? How are you mobilising your soldiers? What's going on with your morale? Where are you getting people from? They're coming because Italy is where a world war is being fought by the Allies. There's Brazilians in Italy, and people from New Zealand, people from as far away as possible.
24 different nations fighting in the Allied armies by May 1944.
So there's a world war going on in Italy in a way that in Northwest Europe, perhaps with Americans, Canadians, Brits, and Poles and French, that there isn't. Quite the same way. And do you think it's just because I don't buy, obviously we've been doing this a long time and I've spoken to you a lot. I don't buy that it's a sideshow, the Mediterranean theatre. Of course it isn't. You don't spend that kind of effort on a sideshow. Sheer effort, sheer industrial effort. If you're spending your factories, which is, we go back to Phillips, who we mentioned at the start of this, if you're using your factories, you're using your factories to a great extent in the Mediterranean, aren't you? It's a total effort. Even if it's not your main effort, it's still so. Do you think it's because it's so complicated that it's one of the forgotten theatres of the Second World War? Because it's not a moral straight line. Just for starters, it's not a moral straight line.
Yeah, and I think that's why everyone just focuses on Casino, because it's there was a monastery there was a big bloody battle. You can just focus on that, and that kind of sort of
covers you off.
It covers you off, and that's ticking that box. And I think it's really, really underselling the story because, as you point out, all three parties are going in with huge conundrums.
Yeah,
the Italians are between a rock and a hard place. What do we do? How do we get out of we've got ourselves in a mighty fine mess. How do we get out of this one?
How do we get out of this one without descending into complete civil war just off the recrimination alone? I mean,
exactly that. How do we, without completely destroying our country, embroiling ourselves in civil war? How do we do this? So massive conundrum for the Italians.
Yeah, I mean, it's a calzone shit sandwich of the highest order that they've served themselves, isn't it?
Of the highest order. I mean, you literally couldn't get any higher.
Yeah.
Then the Germans have got a problem because of Italy. The whole point of Italy being there is so that they don't have to worry about the southern flank. Now they have to worry about the southern flank, and they don't know if they can rely on them at all once they have sorted out. And it means they're going to have to kind of pour in lots and lots of troops if they're going to maintain the geographical reach that they've already got, or else they're going to have to retreat, and that's obviously not something that they want to countenance. Yep. So but where they're going to find these troops from, and how's that going to function?
Yep.
So and to what limit do they do? Do they do the Pisa Rimini line, or do they go south of Rome? Blah blah blah. All this sort of stuff. And how do they just add yet another theatre to their already burgeoning demands of war.
Yeah.
For the Allies, it's like, well, what do we do now? We know we're going to do the cross-channel invasion. We know we've got the Pacific War going on. We know we've got everything going on in Southeast Asia. But we've also got a huge amount of resources here in the Mediterranean. We can't just do nothing until May next year in the Mediterranean in the West. So we've got to do something. But is doing something with what we've got going to be enough, or are we going to then get ourselves sucked into something that we then can't stop? So everyone's got these dilemmas. And the Italian campaign starts with everyone pissed off, basically, before you've even started, with a huge amount of jeopardy for all parties, with a huge amount of risk for all parties. Yeah. So from a storyteller's point of view, I think that's rather cool, because it means you're setting off with a huge amount of jeopardy from everyone involved. And from a kind of storytelling point of view, what's not to like? From a point of view of the poor bastards that had to live through this, whether you're Italian, German, whether you're Hans Golder with his Werfer battery, or whether you're American, Canadian, New Zealander, whatever, the whole thing is an absolute horror show of gargantuan proportions.
Yeah.
And it is all about individuals, and it is all about the people that have to do it. And because of the mountains, because it negates machinery and modernity, there is a kind of sort of levelling of the playing field, which happens in Italy, which is not apparent elsewhere, and certainly not apparent in Northwest Europe, and certainly not apparent actually in the Pacific, either, or Southeast Asia.
I mean, maybe there's
where material advantage is a huge advantage. Here, it just isn't. And so for the guys on the ground, especially, you're having to do much more with less than is expected by your way, from the Allied point of view, of their way of war.
Yeah. We're going to take a break. I've just written something down. It's because I had a thought then also about. Okay. But we'll take a break. We'll be back in a second. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. And as you probably, if you're hanging on by your fingernails, you've been through several digressions already. But there's a point emerging, isn't there, Jim? I think the reason Italy, I was struck by what you just said about how material advantage, all those things fade away. They're not important. They level the playing field. If you're defending a mountainside, that's old. That's as old as warfare itself. You've got the high ground. You can see what the other guy's doing. You have the advantage, and just the distances have increased. It's that thing about warfare that basically, as the technology comes in, the distances increase. I think maybe another reason Northwest Europe, is the thing that everyone's sort of that's dominated the narrative is that the Cold War was expected to be fought like that with giant mechanized armies, and that if things came to blows in Germany in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, it was going to be in a mechanized army style, and that therefore the story of what's happening in this sort of mountainous encounter of the Allies and the Axis in Italy is kind of irrelevant. There's nothing to learn from it. So there's nothing to look at, really. If you're coming at it through a Cold War lens, that it's a thing you've not got to countenance. It's this kind of mountain warfare and all. Do you see what I mean? Whereas in fact,
I do completely. I'm sure that comes into play. I also think it's something as basic as tourism, though. And this is the whole point about the Battle of Atlantic. You're not really going to go to the kind of mid-Atlantic meeting point because it's in the middle of the Atlantic, and how do you get there? No VLR liberators around anymore. So forget that. And then if you're going to fly to America, you go up via Greenland anyway. Yeah. So that doesn't work. And then. But what you can do is you can walk on a very nice beach, whether it be Dunkirk, whether it be Sword, Omaha, or Utah, or Juneau, and do you know what? The great thing about Normandy is it's got really nice food and it's got Calvados and beer. So I think there's a lot of that going on, which is why no one goes into the interior of Normandy because you're there, you just go on the beach. Yeah. So I'm not sure how many people. I would have thought more people go to visit Casino with a war hat on than they do the Reichswald. Yeah. For example. Yeah. I wonder how many people go to the bridge at Remagen.
But that's the weather.
Yeah. But I think
the food's better in Italy than in Germany.
And if you want to do Battle of Britain, you can go to Duxford and see Spitfires fly Biggin Hill and see Peter Monk's mob kind of doing their stuff every day. So I think it's just a bit more visual. People want sort of instant gratification, don't they?
They do. Right. Now we've something we have to talk about, which is we touched on them earlier, which is the reprints. the Second World War Voices reprints that we've done. I'm going to say that we've done this.
We've done this with
Penguin, who've been brilliant.
But Penguin, it's a bantam press, really. It is Penguin, I know, but it's Bill Scott Carr and Eloisa at Bantam that have sort of done the hard yards from their side of things. But because they're all part of the big Penguin Random House consortium these days, you can shove a penguin on it. And why not? Because it's the most iconic of book labels, isn't it? But the idea, when we started this, what we want to do is we want to get these gems that have been sort of consigned to the kind of, they're long out of print. And give them a new life. But what we didn't want to do was go down that whole kind of sort of slightly faux retro kind of Gill Sans kind of rejacketing, which sort of says, we're trying to make this look like something from the 1950s or 30s. What we want to do is make it look classy and really nice. So these are paperbacks, but they've got little end papers that fold out like
beautiful
a hardback.
End papers.
And beautifully done. And you and I have done little intros, haven't we? So you've done Chindits because that was your baby, and I've done Eclipse by Alan Moorhead and Sands of Dunkirk, and the plan is to do a whole load of them. They've all got the same look. They've all got the same sort of branding.
This sort of racing green stripe around them and on the back cover.
Yes, and I think the thing to do is it's going to be green for army stories,
for land,
blue and lighter blue for RAF.
Yeah,
I think.
I mean, I read Chindit as an audiobook for the Patreons, and that book came to me via a friend who knew Richard Rhodes James, had met him and had given him this volume, and said, "Oh yes, I would. Don't like to mention it, but I did write about it." And it's an extraordinary account because what's interesting is he was Rhodes James was the signals officer, so he knew what was going on. So unusually, because very often, if you've got first-hand accounts, people, and this is the thing, infantrymen don't know where they are. They don't know who's on their left side, who's on their right side. They often don't know what's going on. Full stop, right? Except from a sort of start.
But signalsman does.
So he knew what was going on. So he knew what was going on, sort of across the board because everything was going through him. And it's. I mean, the main thing is the hardship is the bit that makes you sort of makes me wince. And then, but I've been reading this week. I've been as well as reading Sledgehammer. I've been reading Alan Moorhead's Eclipse.
Well, isn't it interesting? Wow. Isn't it interesting?
Well, yeah.
Because I think the interesting thing about Alan Moorhead. So Alan Moorhead was an Australian, but he wrote for the Daily Express, and Daily Express was the most popular. Well, it's the most popular paper in the UK at the time. And was really good. I've read a lot of the wartime editions of the Daily Express, and it's a really, really good paper. It's a bit more sort of, it's not quite as stiff and formal as the Times or the Telegraph or whatever. It's got more pictures and they got really, really good writers, and he was one of their leading correspondents, and he was there with 8th Army for most of the Desert War. And wrote 3 books on it, and they're all absolutely fantastic. Some of the descriptions of the battles that he's witnessing are just amazing. And I think you can buy the kind of, Alan Moorhead's African trilogy as a kind of whole I think it's published by Castle. But Eclipses is one about, what follows. So it's sort of, it's from Sicily, Salerno, all the way up through Italy, and then Northwest Europe. And it's just completely fascinating. And the interesting thing about him, and you can see where a lot of it, I always thought it was sort of why the kind of post-war sort of downer on the Second World War, and particularly kind of Allied effort on it, was down to Britain's case, post-Empire guilt, collapse as a great power, rise of the United States and the Soviet Union, Cold War, Germans the only ones who fought the Soviets, etc., etc. But actually, what you're seeing is that he's in his late 20s, early 30s, or whatever he is in the 1940s. He's intelligent. He has got privileged access. So he's having interviews with generals and press conferences, and he's going to those. So he's getting a kind of insider view that a lot of people is getting. But what he doesn't understand is the operational level at all. I mean, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand about global shipping crisis. He doesn't understand about the constraints. He doesn't understand about huge. He does appreciate the global nature of the war, but not in the same way that you can do as a historian. Decades later.
Yeah.
And so from his point of view, what he sees is a lot of crapness. He sees a lot of slowness, a lot of ponderousness, a lot of a lot of wastage. He gets to see dead bodies and young men who are about to be slaughtered. And so there's and because he's educated and because of the access he's getting, but because of the limited access he's getting very much a sort of slightly lions led by donkeys kind of view of the Second World War, which I think is really, really interesting. And you suddenly realise that actually people like him are huge contributors to that.
Yeah,
that movement, you can see where Max and everyone and Carlo D'Este are getting, it is reinforcing the views that they think. I mean, Alan Moorhead and Max Hastings are absolutely like for like, aren't they? And their interests, their concerns, where they're coming from. Yeah. And they're both journalists, of course.
Yeah. Yes,
but it's fascinating. It is really fascinating and beautifully written, and parts of it are just stunning, I think.
Yeah.
It's really, really worth a look. Worth a read.
But there's a brilliant bit where he follows Monty around before D-Day, right?
Yes.
And, I suppose I've heard 50 generals addressing their soldiers, most of them with much better speeches than this. Indeed, I suppose this speech in print is just about as bad as one could hope to read, outside the hearty naivety of the kindergarten. Spoken by Montgomery to the soldiers who were about to run into the Atlantic Wall, it had magic. No mention of God, of divine assistance, no mention of England, no, not a single eternal verity, no hate, no question of revenge. But I doubt whether the soldiers remembered the words. The words were the least of it. The whole performance succeeded because it was the expression of a wanted emotion, without their consciously knowing that the speech adopted an attitude that the soldier wanted to have. At the end of it, they felt they knew Montgomery as he believed he knew them. They felt they were thinking on the same plane as he was, and they would indeed go into the assault together. I mean, it's very interesting because that's basically saying, I don't know how he did it, because you can hear it in there already. This idea that somehow Montgomery's performing sort of con trick, that it's, you know what I mean? That he's sprinkling doubt on the thing even before the ink's dry in a way. And I think you're right. I think it is very interesting that he's of that sort of angle.
He's just a certain type, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's
well, I think
well
the fact
read,
that
he's interested, he's well travelled, he's worldly, he's a brilliant writer.
I think the fact he's Australian is a big part of it. Oh yeah, you bloody Poms, I think there's some of that kind of leery look at and that brings you an end of empire feeling, given Singapore, doesn't it? If you're an Australian,
I guess so.
I guess so.
I thought it was I just think it's a really, really good. It's a really, really good book,
and it's good first. It is good first draft of history stuff, and there are several people like that writing at this time and kind of this stuff. I mean, the Express is more. The Express was a broadsheet, wasn't it? At the time, and it's sort of broadsheets then, and what broadsheets are kind of like now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Whereas broadsheets...
There's this brilliant bit here where you talk about the crossing of the Rhine. He goes, March 18th, General Dempsey perched his map on a wooden bench at his camp near Venlo and explained, we will cross the Rhine on the night of the 23rd. 4 corps are under my command. 30 corps will cross in the north near Rees and continue northward for the capture of Emmerich. 12 corps will cross in the centre at Xanten, while the commandos turn south to capture Wesel. On the following morning, the 18th United States Airborne Corps, with the 6th British Airborne Division under command, will drop near the Issel River on the opposite bank of the Rhine and secure the bridges there. Finally, the 8th Corps will follow through, and I cannot yet tell you how far they will go. The 9th American Army will also attack on my right flank and proceed eastward along the Ruhr. I asked, this well might be the last battle. Yes. Dempsey was an exact and energetic technician. Ever since landing in Normandy, whenever we met him, one was astonished at the precision to which he elucidated a plan and brought a map to life. It's just... And that's the privileged access. Yeah. But of course, they're getting that privileged access to generals, which most people don't get. But the generals are only telling them what they want to tell them and what they feel is safe to tell them.
Yeah,
so it's obviously it's severely limited to what they're getting. Yeah. So they're therefore quite often putting 2 and 2 together and creating 5.
Yeah. But there's that. I mean, he goes on to describe Dempsey, and it's really There was a certain greyhound quality about him. Most people spoke too slowly for him, and in nearly every meeting I had with him, his thoughts were racing impatiently ahead of the conversation. I mean, so yeah, I've got other shit to do than talk to a journalist. Thanks very much. I'm trying to run an army here. He hated.
I got a water window.
Exactly. He hated crowds. He hated displays. He avoided the radio and rousing orders of the day. He was unable to relax and talk while his photograph was being taken, since that would have meant concentrating on two things at the same time, which is inefficient.
Yeah, well, I know about that.
Yeah. For him, the emotional, inspirational method of handling things was untidy and imprecise. He had an excellent memory. And every time I went to him, he had a neat list of things he wanted to talk about. You bet he did, because he's dealing with a journalist. So Dempsey's not just going to have a wide-ranging chat, is he? He's like, these are the points I need to discuss with you, and this is all you're going to get.
Yeah,
I think I mean,
well, needless to say, I'm going to be following Moorhead in Italy.
Yeah.
I followed him a lot. I used him when I was doing my North Africa book. I think he's a fascinating character. Yeah. His daughter Caroline's also a writer and a very good one. And it's thanks to her that we got the book. She had to give us permission to reprint it. And
then the next one, the third of the series, is
Richard Collier. He's just so. This was my introduction to. So Richard Collier was really my introduction to the Second World War, because I read Eagle Day.
Right. Okay.
Which is his great book about the Battle of Britain. Yeah. And Sands of Dunkirk is the one I think he wrote before Eagle Day. Yeah. And it really was my introduction to Dunkirk as well. So he is of a breed of people that were operating in the 1950s and 60s, and they were journalists. And I think he was in I don't know, Press and Propaganda Corps or something, for the British Army in the Second World War. But or maybe he was in the RAF or something, I can't remember. Anyway, the point is he's a journalist like Cornelius Ryan, like Alan Moorhead. Yeah. And they're adopting this different style of writing, which is sort of reportage. And again, it's very kind of sort of bottom up telling of the story. Yeah. And what he's done is in the late 1950s, early 1960s, he's just interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of survivors. And they're all sorts. They're French locals, they're French army, they're British, they're Germans as well. And so he's got all these voices. And it's all about, it's just, I shamelessly ape his style, I have to say. I mean, he's one of his...
I didn't want to... I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, well, Yeah, so look at this. This is absolutely classic. This is how you start a book. Yeah. Afterwards, looking back to that evening, it was the silence that Augusta Hersey remembered most. Already, as on any other day in the cafe, she had helped Maman array fresh coffee filters behind the worn zinc bar, polished oilcloth tabletops, yet still the Café Lepi door stood silent and empty. It was as if the shadowed rooms, like the city itself, were listening for something. I mean... You're straight in there, human story. There's no kind of, then we did this, 40th Brigade moved over to here. Well, and forget all that.
And she starts the next chapter, of course. Augusta Hersey had no time to make up her mind. It was her nature to accept what fortune offered. At 21, her life had followed no set pattern. The world had willed it otherwise. Her father's daughter, boyish, impetuous. I mean, it's about, it is about, it's very much about the people, I suppose, in a way, because if you were reading this it's just from the 50s, isn't it? If you were reading this, then you'd have read the newspaper. You'd have read the newspaper reports, and so you'd have seen the sort of arrows on maps. 61. So this is filling in the people. It's colouring it in, isn't it? And
but it's 20. So let's say he's publishing it in 1921. He starts researching it in 1959. Yeah. So he's writing to all these people 58, 59. So he's within 2 decades of it happening. He's writing to all these people, getting their account. And what they're doing is he's interviewing some of them, but mostly they're writing him letters and reports. And he's just putting it all together. I mean, it's a fabulously entertaining book. Yeah. And it's not big on. The whys and wherefores, that's for other people to do. This is about the human experience of the Dunkirk evacuation. Yeah. And it's terrific. It's really, really good. Yeah, I just love it. Actually, it's inspired me to. I've thought about. I can't remember if I mentioned this to you. I've got an idea to do. So there's this book. Did I tell you about the Killer Angels? No. In America? No. Okay, so the Killer Angels book, I think it's called Michael Shaara, Shaara. And it's a big hit in the United States. And it's all about the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863. Right. But everyone in it is real. All the research is absolutely second done. There's no fictional characters whatsoever, but it is a novel. but it is a novel because he's giving thoughts to Chamberlain and Jeb Stuart and Pickett and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so I suddenly thought, actually, wouldn't it be cool to do a novel on Dunkirk, like the 8 days from the Sunday the 26th to Sunday the 3rd or whatever it is.
But you're doing Bertrand Ramsay. You're in his head.
You're in his head.
So sort of like...
And you're in Bill Tennant's head, and you're in Hitler's head, and you're in all these people. And so your prologue is the whole order, and then it starts off with the kind of National Day of Prayer in London. And you do the kind of, you 1 minute you're in Downing Street, and you're in the garden with Halifax and Churchill. You can
have that conversation. Yeah,
you can have that conversation. You can finally have that conversation, and everything is, the research is second to none. Obviously, goes without saying. Everyone in it is real. There's not a single person in it who is not a real person.
Yeah.
But you are giving them thoughts. You're getting inside their head. And you just do it as this kind of boom, boom, boom. And if it works, of course, then, next stop D-Day.
Jim Woolworth gripped the controls of the glider.
All that.
He'd rehearsed this 1,000 times in his head. Yeah, etc.
He remembered Sicily. Gosh, that was wonderful. That was a night to forget. Yeah. Exactly. He suddenly made the greatest landing of World War II.
The one landing that changed the course of the whole war. So they are Chindit by Richard Rhodes James, The Sands of Dunkirk by Richard Collier, and Alan Moorehead's Eclipse in our Voices of the Second World War Voices series.
And there's obviously a fantastic, lovely new hardback, which people might want to consider for stockings and Christmas, which is called Command by Al Murray.
Oh, bugger off.
But if you want a little kind of, something to go on the side, a little hors d'oeuvre.
Well, and also I did use Richard
Very
Rhodes,
reasonably priced.
I did use Chindit, Richard Rhodes James' book, as a. I used him as one of my sort of witnesses to Wingate in the Wingate chapter, and drew on that. And if you're because a friend of mine read Command and I sent him Chindit with it. Yeah. And he's going, this is incredible. Just the stuff they're going through physically in the jungle that's plenty to be getting on with. I mean, that's the thing about it, isn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But they're lovely looking books. They're nice books to have, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to end with a little bit of with the old breed.
Yeah, go on him.
Aiming the automatic at the centre of the head, I pressed the grip, safety, as I also squeezed the trigger slightly to take up the slack. The thought raced through my mind that he was too close to use his grenade, so he would probably use a bayonet or knife on me. My hand was steady even though I was scared. It was he or I. "What's the password?" I said in a low voice. No answer. "Password," I demanded as my finger tightened on the trigger. The big pistol would fire and buck with recoil in a moment, but to hurry and jerk the trigger would mean a miss for sure. Then he'd be on me. "It's a sledgehammer," stammered the figure. I eased up on the trigger. It's Delow, J. Delow. You got any water?" "Jay, why didn't you give me the password? I nearly shot you," I gasped. He saw the pistol and moaned. "Oh, Jesus," as he realised what had nearly happened. "I thought you knew it was me," he said weakly. Jay was one of my closest friends. He was a Gloucester veteran and knew better than to prowl around the way he had just done. If my finger had applied that last bit of pressure to that trigger, Jay would have died instantly. It would have been his own fault, but that wouldn't have mattered to me. My life would have been ruined if I'd killed him, even under those circumstances. My right hand trembled violently as I lowered the big automatic. I had to flip on the thumb safety with my left hand. My right thumb was too weak. I felt nauseated and weak and wanted to cry. Jay crept over and sat on the edge of the gun pit. "I'm sorry, Sledgehammer. I thought you knew it was me," he said. After handing him a canteen, I shuddered violently and thanked God that Jay was still alive. "Just how in hell could I tell it was you in the dark with nips all over the place?" I snarled. Then I reamed out one of the best friends I ever had. I mean, that would that would do me. for that experience. That's plenty. It's all right. Can I go home now? I mean, honestly, it's incredible. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. Eclipse by Alan Moorehead, The Sands of Dunkirk, Chindit by Richard Collier and Richard Rhodes James Chindit. Second World War Voices. We have ways of making you talk reprints. I mean, who'd have thought when we started?
That's what they are.
Who'd have thought when we started War Waffle 3.5 years ago it would lead to this?
Well, what do you know?
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.